My name is Corina Sams, and I will be doing my presentation on Jacques-Henri Lartigue. I really like this quote by Lartigue because he was such a playful person, and it was always about him wanting to enjoy the little things in life, and this quote definitely embodies what his work was all about. Lartigue was born in France in June of 1894. At a young age, Lartigue was living a privileged life and given great opportunities through the wealth that he was born into. At the age of 6, his father presented him with his very first camera, and his youthful emotion kind of took off from there. He started small with taking photos of his family and neighbors, friends, but most of his recognized work was done in his younger years of age and never really noticed as a famous photographer until he was older. Later, realizing that he enjoyed the arts in general rather than only photography, he studied at the Julian Academy, and painting became his new profession for a little while. After being married a couple of times, falling up and down the financial ladder, Lartigue gets discovered by Charles Rideau, who happens to know John Sarkowski. And John Sarkowski decides happily to feature Lartigue in the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in 1975. He was never really featured as an artist until the age of 65, but after this, he was featured many more times before his death. He later died at the age of 92 on September 12th of 1986. Lartigue's photographic career started at the age of 6 when his father gave him his very first 13 by 18 chamber in wood, and he loved it so much that by the time he was 8, he bought his own camera. His childhood was a barrage of snapshots, photos, and all things kind of modern, new, and exciting, but many of Lartigue's first photos were by stereoscope, taking 5,000 stereographs by 1928. He was mostly interested in sketching and photographing things that were moving, which showed great promise for him later when he started to kind of dabble into sports photography by shooting photos of automobile racing. He first became interested in racing and moving things because of his older brother Maurice, who he later nicknamed Zizou, and in all of his photos you will see his name is Zizou and not Maurice. And Zizou had a love for racing, aviation, and sports, so did Lartigue. Most of his photos were shot of racing were never sold, but the few that were sold to a sporting magazine called La Vie au Grandeur. As Lartigue got older, he started to become more interested in painting and photography, and focused on painting as his profession. Photography and painting still weren't quite enough to fulfill his need for art, so he kept a journal every day as well until his death. Middle age, Lartigue got married in 1919 to Madeleine Messenger, who he called Bibi, his first wife. Together they had a son. 2 years later, a daughter. 3 years after their son was born. Unfortunately, the daughter died shortly after birth. And then 10 years after their marriage, Jacques and Bibi separated. Lartigue was married 3 times. The second time was to Marcelle, or Coco, as she was known. They were married in 1934 and then divorced in 1942. And then the third marriage was to Florette. They married on August 28th of 1945, and they remained married happily together until Jacques' death. In between, he had a mistress. Her name was Renee. They were together for 2 years before saying their goodbyes, and in that time, Lartigue got a very fond liking for the woman's figure, which later portrayed in a lot of his photographs. After the first divorce, Lartigue started down kind of a slope of poverty. His money was gone, and he would sell his paintings or photographs occasionally so that he could live, but he refused to get a job. He wanted to take his freedom to take his art wherever he wanted to, or wherever he so pleased. But after a few years of struggle and no money, he joined the war movement and took his photography with him. He continued to photograph only happy, positive things, though. There's no evidence that shows that he ever turned his camera towards death. He continued to claim that his main focus was on painting and journals to sustain his income, and at age 29, Lartigue finally became noticed by a man named Charles Rideau from the Raffo agency. The next They happened to meet in 1962 when Lartigue was on a cargo ship to Los Angeles with his third wife, Florette, and they made a quick stop on the East Coast. Charles Rodot introduced Lartigue to John Sarkowski, and they hit it off really well. Sarkowski gave him an exhibition of his childhood photos in Paris at the Musée d'Art Décoratif, which is huge for Lartigue because that's when Life magazine took notice and gave him a spread in the 1963 issue, which made him even more well-known. The 1963 edition contained the Kennedy commemoration of his death, and this made Lartigue's work publicized to the largest possible audience. It was always a dream of Lartigue's to own a museum or an art gallery for himself, and before his passing, he finally got to fulfill that dream. He created his own exhibit in the Grand Palace Museum and named his exhibit the Bonjour, Monsieur Lartigue. He died at age 92 on September 12th of 1986 with a continued legacy of painting, photography, and writing. This is one of Lartigue's first photos of his childhood playful stereograph type photos, and he did a lot of these as a kid. I think he really enjoyed the 3D effect that it gave it because he really had a thing for motion. These next two photographs, he's showing a plane that he got to use as a privileged child. It was part of the modernity that he enjoyed. He enjoyed moving objects and planes, and they were a great addition to his collection of photographs that he ended up taking. This is one of his most famous photographs that he created. The iconic thing about this photo is that the shutter speed was too slow to register the car's speed or even the static bystanders, creating a slanted movement to the photo, and that's what made this photograph iconic for him. The next two photographs are showing more of the race cars that the wealthier class got to indulge in, and the classic Lartigue photo with the mechanical side of things that he loved, and the motion, of course, that he had, and the love for racing. Lartigue was always captivated as a boy and as a man by women and how they interacted with each other. He found them very beautiful and really hard not to take photographs of. He really enjoyed the figure, and it was mostly in tribute to his wives and to Renee, his mistress. This is a tennis tournament that Lartigue attended and shot photos of regularly. He was very keen to the first women to win the tournaments, but occasionally caught photographs of other players in a mid-air sprawl or two. Lartigue made it a weekly event to go to the beach, and he would bring his camera with him. As people would play, he would shoot the photos, and then he would go play, and then he would come back and shoot some more photos. But he was very in tune with how to get the right composition with the sun. Whether they were moving or laying down catching some sun rays, he was a self-taught photographer, and he really learned composition on his own through his beach photographs. As I mentioned before, Jacques had always had a love for women, and this is a photo of Bibi, his first wife. He took this photo the year that he and Bibi actually divorced. These next two photographs are of his mistress, Renee. There's a rumor out there that says that Lartigue had a fixation with hands and jewelry, and it's unknown, but his journal talks highly of the beauty and these poses that he had Renee in. This is another of Renee. This is a photo of Coco, Jacques' second wife, and the year that they were married is when he took this photograph. Last but certainly not least is Florette, Lartigue's third wife, that he met at the age of 21, and he was 48 years old when he actually took this photograph. He was a self-taught photographer. He never really had anybody to instruct him, except for when he was a child. His father did help him learn how to first use a camera. He was definitely in the modern age. Everything was changing, mechanical was coming out, and technology was advancing. He did a lot of street photography and a lot of straight photography as well. Everything he did, he would just take his camera and he would shoot it. He never manipulated his photographs until in his later years. He also did silver print stereographs and dabbled into color a little while. He always went back to black and white, though. He didn't stay in color for too long. Being as part of a higher social class and having the money, he had a lot of access to the race cars and the Grand Prix and the airplanes, and they got a lot of his iconic images that he had, including the pictorial innovation of speed that he had in his Grand Prix photograph. Thank you.